Heat shimmers over Camp Dry Mesa's motor pool, while concrete cracks show, and HEMTT and LMTV hoods hum. Specialist Riley Hart. MOS 92 A with S 4 Logistics. Stands at the edge. Gloves snug. Measuring lanes by footfalls and watching yellow paint guard the access path. She almost rushes a move, then stops and resets her breathing. Corporal Marcus Dwyer tosses a casual mock, and Private First Class Noel Kim looks curious and embarrassed. Sergeant First Class Dana Whitaker passes, directing Hart to fall in with staging. And Hart answers yes. Sergeant. Outdoor protocol sits steady in the back of her head. A tablet's compass nib shows north. Yet the grid feels off by a hair. So she waits and lets the heat shimmer hide her scan. A grit itch crawls under her collar. In uniformed life, silence often means someone is collecting everything. The desert heat camouflages her observation. Engines murmur against paperwork rhythms as Camp Dry Mesa's motor pool readies for a field training exercise. Clipboards tap, metal ticks, and heat wavers over hemped hoods and LMTV mirrors. Specialist Riley Hart. A quiet SPC in S4 Logistics. Stays in the shadow line, measuring lane widths by the music of her steps. She tightens a glove seam, stung eyes blinking once. The tablet's compass nib sits near the edge, and the grid feels off. But she saves the thought. First Lieutenant Avery Sloan crosses with a roster and confirms Hart as newly assigned logistics, keeping the tempo pointed at the afternoon plan. Corporal Marcus Dwyer guides a fueler toward a spot that kisses yellow paint, while Private First Class Noel Kim scribbles fast. Eager and a little pink. Chief Lena Brooks frowns at the squeezed corridor, yet keeps work moving under Unit SOP. Hart files the mismatch and waits for a cleaner entry point. She chooses timing over credit, anchoring calm while others perform. Tension holds. On day one, precision has to arrive before cleverness. A supply truck noses into the staging lane, while Corporal Marcus Dwyer chops the air with confident signals and Private First Class Noel Kim tracks placement on a tablet. The Camp Dry Mesa motor pool vibrating with routine daily noise and radio static. Specialist Riley Hart feels the grid orientation sit wrong. She takes a half step, nearly swallows it, then speaks in an even tone that offers help without sharpening edges. Dwyer waves her off and keeps the roll coming. Chief Lena Brooks squints at the yellow paint where the access corridor pinches too tight. Yet she lets work flow to avoid a jam. Hart eases closer, turns the tablet so north anchors on the radio tower instead of the sun glare. The compass letter pivots. The lane clears. No one celebrates. Tires grind gravel. Heat stings Hart's left eye, and she blinks grit away while chatter quiets by degrees. Out here, the smallest misalignment can snowball into a serious mistake. The soft click of a screen turning becomes the loudest sound in the yard. A radio call snaps across the net about a mismatch at checkpoint 3, while the high desert yard stays loud and impatient. Engines idle. A forklift chirps. Corporal Marcus Dwyer wants it fixed now and points with his whole arm. Private First Class Noel Kim hovers with a tablet, trying to match manifest lines to paint-scarred crates while the numbers blur against dust and the steady throb of metal. Specialist Riley Hart moves to the edge of the lane and sets a palm on wood that has seen too many summers. She reads a faded NSN, traces chipped stenciling, and feels a small shift as she lifts a corner just enough to know where the weight wants to live. The center is not where the manifest says it should be. She almost speaks too soon, catches herself, then decides to say what matters and nothing else. Dwyer cracks a joke about eyeballing tonnage, and the usual smiles try to form and do not quite make it. Chief Lena Brooks arrives with a set jaw and authorizes a controlled open, The lid sighs against its hinges and foam shows. Wrong type for the planned route. The second crate confirms it. The yard drops a notch quieter. Like someone turned the volume down without warning. Hart steps back and lets the results speak. Sergeant First Class Dana Whitaker takes the lane. Assigns logging, relabeling, and a reroute that keeps the emergency corridor clear. Copy rides the net. Roger follows close. Kim watches Hart's hands the way a student watches chalk, as if the notes might appear by themselves on a board. A minor spill drill pings over the net, gets answered, and passes as quickly as it came. Lanes recover. The yellow paint of the corridor breathes wider after the reroute. Hart keeps scanning for other mislabels. Eyes flicking to weight stamps and training, use only markings. Grit under her sleeve itches, and she rolls her wrist once to make the fabric stop biting. She reads weight the way a musician tests a string. A private calibration no one taught and no one else hears. The sun leans on the concrete, and the chatter changes. Confidence begins to replace the need to score points. Credibility does not ask for speeches. It repeats accuracy until no one can ignore it. Staff Sergeant Hector Ruiz announces a short spill response drill across Camp Dry Mesa's motor pool as afternoon heat pushes tempers thin. Radios crackle. Staging lanes feel tighter than they should. Cones, nudging paint. The spill kit sits ready and PPE checks buzz while HEMTT and LMTV noses bake in the light. The yard stumbles at first. A low cable droops into a head path. Specialist Riley Hart lifts it and seats the hook until it clicks at the proper height, letting traffic pass, while Corporal Marcus Dwyer barks placements and Private First Class Noel Kim tries to keep notes straight. Hart threads through moving bodies without touching anyone. A shoulder brushes her sleeve, and she redirects with 2 fingers toward the west hatch, instead of the wrong door. Chief Lena Brooks clocks the correction and keeps equipment checks flowing. Wrenches and clipboards moving like a routine. The timer runs. Sergeant First Class Dana Whitaker rides the net. Copy and moving, bouncing back, and keeps the access corridor clear. Hart knocks down small snarls before they become stoppages. Sweat itches at her collar. She almost snaps a reply at a careless shove, then swallows it and stays even. The drill ends. Stopwatch freezes at a low 2-minute mark. Safety tape flutters and settles. Breathing is heavy and jokes are thin. Dwyer finds a lane marker and nudges it wider. Kim reviews the tablet and fixes one skewed line. Dust lifts off boots as the corridor clears by a margin. Eyes land on Hart for a half-second longer than earlier and move on with less doubt. When the pressure climbs, what endures are the habits you built long before today. Her 2-finger touch becomes a silent arrow that moves an entire flow. First Lieutenant Avery Sloan swings by the motor pool as word slides down the line that a colonel is making rounds. This afternoon, Staff Sergeant Hector Ruiz and Sergeant First Class Dana Whitaker cue the yard to tighten up without drama. Voice is low. Specialist Riley Hart straightens her blouse cuffs and seals the sleeve Velcro. A faint itch under the fabric distracts her for a second, and she resists the urge to scratch. Outdoor courtesy sits in the back of her mind like a checklist built from small corrections. Specialist Andre Watts drops a metal case, and the clang skitters briefly. Hart does not. She resets her breathing and keeps her eyes level. The approach of senior brass changes posture across Camp Dry Mesa. Whitaker calls the yard to attention. Hart raises a clean salute to the incoming officer and receives a proper return, then drops her hand on the beat. No one mislabels an NCO as sir or ma'am. Movement slows to measured beats and idle ramps soft. Heat glare makes the yellow lane paint pulse. Sloan checks spacing along the access corridor, while Ruiz taps a cone straight. Hart notes a tiny kink in the staging line and files it for later. Ceremony is not empty. It is the shared language that steadies a unit before words arrive. For once, the wind is louder than the jokes. And that quiet carries weight. Camp Dry Mesa's motor pool settles into a careful hush as a colonel approaches on inspection. Sergeant First Class Dana Whitaker cues attention without a shout. And the line of HEMT and LMTV holds steady in the heat like machinery expecting a test. Specialist Riley Hart straightens, seals her sleeve Velcro, and lifts a clean salute. The colonel returns it properly, then pauses. A sliver of ink under her cuff catches his eye. A small curve like a wing that most would miss. A bead of sweat tickles her wrist and she nearly scratches, then stops. He addresses her by name in a calm voice and asks if she once served under Captain Arlen Price. Hart answers yes, sir, without embellishment. Corporal Marcus Dwyer and Private First Class Noel Kim hold still, unsure why this brief exchange seems to tilt the yard's balance. Recognition passes between the two, quiet and final. For everyone else, there is no explanation. Only posture and tone, and the weight suggested by a muted memorial tattoo. Customs and courtesies stay correct. No one mislabels an NCO as sir or ma'am. And no one hunts a story during an inspection. The ceremonial frame contains the heat, and the unit breathes inside it. The colonel's eyes soften. He lets the moment land, then allows the yard to continue. Sergeant First Class Whitaker releases attention with a measured cue, and engines resume their low rhythm. People glance at Hart differently now. Not with confusion, but with the start of respect, as if a door opened and they only heard the hinge. Dwyer notices the access corridor holding clear by inches and adjusts a cone without a joke. Kim checks the tablet orientation and does not rush the next entry. Hart resets her sleeve, the ink hidden again, and returns to the work that has been waiting. A mark on skin can carry a whole career, but only a few know how to read it. Less than an inch of ink changes the conversation without adding a single word. And the yard learns to listen. Respect arrives quiet, then stays like afternoon shade. Colonel Thomas Rourke pauses after proper salutes, and the Camp Dry Mesa motor pool waits without breathing hard. Heat pressing on metal and skin as rank meets routine. He turns a worn challenge coin between his fingers. Nickel, dulled by years in pockets and palms. He places it in Specialist Riley Hart's glove and lets the weight speak for him. One word follows in a low voice. Proceed. And the yard seems to accept the command like a level set. Hart almost says, thank you, then edits herself and gives a quiet nod that costs less and means more. Corporal Marcus Dwyer straightens before he knows he is doing it. Private First Class Noel Kim lifts a hand to the brim of his cap, unsure why. Chief Lena Brooks cancels a wisecrack mid-breath and rattles lane status instead. Sergeant First Class Dana Whitaker keeps decorum. Eyes on spacing and corridor as HEMT and LMTV noses idle in the heat shimmer. Work resumes on the beat of that single syllable. The coin's edge warms fast in Hart's glove as she tucks it away. She checks a strap and a label, then clears a bumper by a shoe length and keeps the flow moving. A grit itch under her cuff steals a second, and she resets. Scanning the tablet grid and the compass nib at the corner, while radio brevity clicks across the net. Copy. Roger. Moving. Dwyer's voice lands cleaner. Kim's notes stop trailing off, and Brooks slides a card aside to widen clearance without performing for anyone. Whitaker confirms the emergency corridor and leaves it alone. The yard feels different now. Fewer jokes. Trimmer acknowledgments. A steadier cadence that does not ask for applause because the absence of resistance is counting for it. Hart turns one more manifest line green and lets her shoulders settle a fraction. Trucks roll on time. Mirrors flashing sun. And the manifest board stops bleeding red for today only. In uniformed spaces, The biggest shifts often begin with something small enough to fit in a hand. One quiet word replaces an entire speech and changes the tempo of the yard. Work settles after the coin moment, and Camp Dry Mesa's motor pool breathes back into motion. Specialist Riley Hart checks a manifest, guides a pallet towards staging, and lets the rhythm of forklifts and idling HMTT and LMTV trucks set the tempo while Corporal Marcus Dwyer approaches with fewer jokes than usual and an honest question about a blind spot near Container 3. Hart studies the corner camera, confirms the dead zone with a quick glance at the monitor, and writes a brief note that marks the angle and hour for coverage. She keeps her voice level. Dwyer nods like he wished he had spotted it first. She walks the line with Private First Class Noel Kim and shows him how to anchor north off the radio tower instead of chasing the sun glare along the roofline. Kim tries it, stumbles on a small detail, and corrects himself with a grin that does not need approval. Sergeant First Class Dana Whitaker adjusts lane SOP to protect the emergency corridor, moving a cone 2 feet and sending a short update over the net. "Good eye," she adds in passing, and the words land without ceremony. Chief Lena Brooks pushes maintenance checks and quietly shifts a cart to widen clearance by a hand width. Specialist Andre Watts walks up with extra tie-down straps and asks where they do the most good. Hart checks labeling, nods West Lane, and moves on. A short internal drill runs to test timing, and a driver starts the wrong turn. Hart stops the misroute with one look and a small pointing gesture, and people read it without debate. Lane clear comes back over the radio. The security monitor shows the former blind corner, now covered by a different angle. Dwyer mirrors Hart's timing on the next truck roll, and he realizes he likes the cleaner cadence because nothing scrapes and nobody jogs to catch up. Radio traffic tightens. Copy and Roger land faster, and gaps between words shrink to what they should have been all afternoon. Kim's compass reference holds steady, and his notes tick green lines down the manifest without that wandering swirl from earlier. Brooks signs off a repair, snaps a latch, and fades from focus. Whitaker watches the corridor breathe open and leaves it alone. Hart keeps the grid in her peripheral, traces strap placement with a brief tap, and returns to the manifest before the ink dries. The yard learns to anticipate instead of react, and the humor that remains trades volume for timing. Leadership does not always come with rank. Sometimes it is the path people choose to follow on their own. Hart's silent cue with her eyes and a single finger redirects motion as effectively as a shouted order. And no one needs the shout anymore. The cadence holds, and trucks roll on time. At the edge of the Camp Dry Mesa motor pool, Private First Class Noel Kim asks gently about Captain Arlen Price. Specialist Riley Hart gives a short answer that neither invites nor shuts anything down. Eyes on the lane, and the coin's edge just barely hidden in her pocket. A forklift chirps somewhere behind the HEMT row, and the manifest board flickers. A brief memory flares. Training hours long ago. The outline of a T-6 Texan 2 crossing a pale sky while Price taught her to treat space like a machine, to anchor north from fixed references, and to read patterns before speaking. She almost shares a story and then lets it pass. Back in the present, Colonel Thomas Rourke's quick recognition fits into place. The small tattoo under Hart's cuff is a private memorial to Price and to a way of working that trusts timing more than volume. Hart tightens a glove seam and checks a manifest line as grit itches at her wrist. Kim tries the radio tower anchor. He misses once, corrects, and the grid settles into a steadier feel. Lane clear comes back over the net. Hart pockets the moment and returns to flow, guiding a pallet with 2 fingers and a step to spare. A good legacy teaches you how to look before you speak. Meaning shows in how containers finally find their exact places at day's end. Evening settles on Camp Dry Mesa as the S4 logistics motor pool hums tonight. Specialist Riley Hart stands where she started. Addressed by name. Small gestures, replacing jokes. Status green. Staging complete. FTX go at 500. She checks a strap. Watches a manifest tick solid. And lets the yard breathe. No speeches. Work done right. Respect kept as space chosen. Quiet professionalism does not need an audience. It is the hidden engine that carries missions. The best moment is when nothing dramatic has to happen.